Hello, I'm Gretchen Baskerville, author of The Life-Saving Divorce, Hope for People Leaving Destructive Relationships. Today, I'm interviewing someone who can help you negotiate for more custody time without the expense of going to court over and over. We'll talk about how to handle criticism and how to find new supportive friendships. And finally, how to help your young children deal with their strong emotions. So let's jump into it. And so I'm really excited to interview you, Jessica, because I heard about you through Flying Free, Natalie Hoffman's. You did an interview with her. And I want to talk to you about how do you handle a high conflict custody problem when you don't have like absolute airtight, like there is no arrest record, there's no felony record, things like that. And then how do you deal with your children who are having to put up with this other parent who is abusive and they know the other parent is abusive? And I'm using gender neutral terms here because I run the Life-Saving Divorce group. And although most of the people who are members are women, we have a fair number of men too. And men can be victims of abuse and neglect and infidelity, just as women can be. I would love to have you, first of all, tell a little bit about your story, and then let's go into in depth and some of the points. Go ahead, take it away.
Yeah, sure. So this is part of my story. That's why I'm so passionate about it. Basically, the short version of it is I was in a destructive marriage, and when I decided to educate myself, let's say, and then decided that this was no longer good for me, was when it started affecting my kids. And I honestly don't know if I would have stepped out of that marriage if it was just me and him.
Yep,
because there were so many years where I thought, I can take a little bit more. I can take a little bit more. But when I couldn't show up the way that I wanted to for my kids, and I started having thoughts where my children would not be safe, I said, no, like the last piece of me to go was that mama bear. And that mama bear was what I would say saved my life. Or my children, I usually say my children saved my life. And so when I did go through my life-saving divorce, I had been looking for resources for my children, because at the end of the day, in my mind, I was doing this for my kids. I was not doing it for myself until a lot of education and understanding came later. But I couldn't find resources to help my kids. There were resources out there for me. You know, you mentioned Natalie Hoffman, there's Leslie Vernick, there's Sarah McDougall, there's you. There are so many great resources out there for women or men, mostly women, in destructive marriages, but there isn't a lot out there for the children who don't always have the luxury of stepping out of that relationship. And so I decided that once I had saved myself, it was my turn to save my kids. And so I just went digging and I took courses, and that's kind of what's landed me here today.
All right. Well, one of the things you talk about is building a village to raise resilient kids. And, you know, I'm talking about the situations where, I mean, you talk to women, I talk to women, and it's a common story. My kids don't want to go with the other parent. That other parent is fill in the blank, neglectful or self-centered or out of touch or not affirming or highly critical or even dangerous to the point of being physically violent or practically incarcerating the children, locking them in the house and things like that. I mean, that breaks any good parent's heart. And although I know from trauma experts that you can rebuild after even trauma like that, talk to us about your view of how that can be done. You talk about building the village and raising resilient kids. How do you do that?
Yeah, so I really come at this from the point that you, as the safe parent, cannot be the only adult in your children's lives telling them the truth.
Mm,
because guaranteed their destructive parent is telling them their own version of the truth.
right.
And that just puts this he said, she said, who's correct, potential for loyalty conflicts with the kids. And it's not good for anyone. And so I really encourage parents who are going through this to step out of isolation. And sometimes that can be uncomfortable, and really dig into what kind of people do I want to surround myself with, and what kind of support do I need, and then start working as the layers move out. So what kind of support do my children need? I started this in 2020, and I think that was, in many ways, COVID was a gift in this regard. And I think people are much more inclined now to realize that, hey, I can build really incredible relationships, even if I've never met someone face to face. I have a group of women that is similar to the life-saving divorce group that you run. And I also have a program that kind of digs a little bit deeper into how to build this village. A few of these women literally meet nightly, and they've been doing this
Mm.
for almost 18 months for
Wow.
prayer. And
Wow.
I claim no credit for this. This was, one of them needed something. She needed to be more intentional about her prayer life. She needed support regularly, even if it was just a brief touch in. And she had already built these relationships. And these women have never met each other in real life, the
Isn't
majority of
that
them.
amazing? This happens when you are in extreme need and you connect with other people who totally get you. When prayer is involved, I say, I don't do anything in these groups. I get a front row seat to watch the Holy Spirit change lives and
Yeah.
rebuild hearts and hope and faith. Tell us more about building that village and helping raise resilient kids.
Yeah. So when safe parent, in my case, I work with moms exclusively, but I totally agree. There can be men who are survivors of this type of relationship. So if the safe parent has a safety net where they can learn to regulate, stand up for themselves, disagree in an environment that's healthy, then they are in exponentially more capable of helping their children do the same. And if you're dealing with tweens, teens, and or children who get to that point, they don't want to hear from you as the parent anyway. So what you've
Right.
done is you've created this other layer of protection for your children, because they can say, I don't really want to talk to mom about this, but I know mom's friend over here who I've had this relationship with, and I know mom is super close to. I'm going to go ask her.
Oh, that's
And
great.
guaranteed, she's going to say the same thing that I would have said, or mom would have said, or dad would have said, but in a slightly different way. And the child is going to hear that better. And then the other thing that it does is it gives the opportunity for safe and healthy parent similar or adult relationships. So, for example, in my case, I have some local friends who have turned into family for my kiddos. And so when their father is not entirely emotionally safe, my friend's husband stands in as dad for them. He shows them how to cook. He holds them when they're crying. He asks about their day. And this doesn't necessarily mean that it's a daily touch point, although there has been times of that, but they experience that safe fatherly relationship with someone. And that is so incredibly healing for them. And it's also a provision for their future, so that they are building that resilience and they do understand what safety looks like. And therefore, just like when we look at Jesus, we know what the truth looks like. If they see someone who is safe, who is male or female safe, and they hold it up to something that's not, they're going to see the difference.
Now, this is going to be making this transition is really tough, because most of us who were in highly dysfunctional, very destructive marriages, we've kept it secret. We've kept it secret for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. And so to come forth and finally tell the truth, That's a big step.
It is.
And it's going to take some courage. And for some of us, we don't have safe friends. Maybe we attend a church where divorce is for abuse is not even acceptable. It's not condoned. Or maybe we have parents who are just as dysfunctional as our own relationship is. So they're not really there for us. Finding that little safe cadre of friends, whether it's online or physical, do you have any tips on how to find somebody physical and local? I mean, I think we can do it online. We just go on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram and we can develop some sympathetic relationships. But how do we do that in person?
I have a big dream, and I have told God about this, so I'm leaving it up to him. But I have this dream that all across the continental US and Canada, there will be these little pockets within 150 miles. So from any point, if I live in Phoenix, if there's nothing in Phoenix, then at least within 150-mile radius, I can find this little pocket of safe people who have been through something similar, or who have walked with someone through something similar. And so I think the foundation can be built online because it's just so much easier to connect with like-minded people. I'm thinking of, your group, you mentioned you had about 5,000 in there. Well, those 5,000, where are they located?
Right.
And that's that little heartbeat. That's the heartbeat of what can happen. And then being intentional about building those relationships with people who are semi-local and making the trip out for a cup of coffee, or being vulnerable with somebody who you already understand has the foundation level of safety, and then just slowly moving forward in that way. And I think also you mentioned pretending and not necessarily being honest. So I created this diagram, and this is typically where I find that people who are in destructive marriages either find themselves here between their children and their self, or here between others and God, or maybe even here. But that's either home-centered, collective-centered, or ministry-centered. And then sometimes when we're coming out of these destructive marriages, we learn who we are, and we learn to speak up for ourselves and stand up for ourselves, and the beauty of the way that God created us. And we can end up over here in this individual-centered space. But the overlap of all of them is what I consider to be the village. So it doesn't really matter what point you start with, but get to know God really well. And that oftentimes has some deconstruction and reconstruction in it. And I know that you've done a lot of this in your book of laying out the principles of things that we've been taught to believe differently. And then figuring out who you are, who your authentic self is. Who did God make you to be? What kind of traits did he give you that reflect him? And how can you shine his light in that way? And then really learning your children as well, because at least for me, I was not a fantastic parent when I was in a destructive marriage. I did not become a really connected mom until I stepped out of that space, because I could not connect with me. And so how was I going to know how to connect with another human, aka my child? And then revisiting this other space, it really doesn't matter where in here you start, but I do think that starting online can feel a little safer because it's not that face-to-face. If there's a rejection or whatever the case may be, you can hide, let's say, a little bit more, but then being intentional and praying into it and asking God to show you how you can move forward in these personal relationships. And if by some chance you are one of the lucky few whose church gets it, then I would say you can start looking there as well. Wouldn't you say, Gretchen, that you can kind of tell the people who may get it? Some people just get it, and you can kind of tell.
Well, can I tell a quick story about that? So I was part of a young mothers of preschoolers group at my church. Now, understand, I've been divorced 25 years. I had kept it a secret how bad my marriage was. I'd been attending this group for several years, the same leader. And I finally felt I had already asked my husband to leave 30 days before. So we're coming on our second month. And I finally said to my group at the very end of our meeting during the prayer time, I said, just want your prayer because I've asked my husband to leave and we're going through a divorce. And one woman in the group, the leader, said, oh no, do you have any idea how much that'll destroy your children? That was, she didn't, yeah, I know. That was her knee-jerk reaction.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, really? You've known me for 2 years and you think I'm the kind of selfish woman who would bail out of a marriage for just any old thing
Mm-hmm.
because I don't care about my kids? On the other side of the table, because we were sitting around in round tables, a woman silently got up. She walked around the table to me and she gave me a big hug.
Mm.
And the difference between these two women was unbelievable. Now, I think as Christians, sometimes we think, well, I can convince that woman with the knee-jerk automatic negative reaction. I'm sure I can, if she just knew my story, I'm sure I could convince her to be on my side. And I would like to encourage women to say, nope, if their knee-jerk reaction is, don't you know how you're destroying your kids? They don't want to hear your story.
Yeah.
And even if you told them your story, they would still come back around to, don't you know how much you're destroying your kids?
Mm-hmm.
They are hard-hearted about abuse. They, for whatever reason, not our problem. We don't need to fix them. They're not the people we need to just put them in another category. It's not that we hate them. It's not that we fear them. It's not that we're disgusted with them. They and their friendship needs to go on the back burner for 90 days, a year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. Okay. And gravitate toward the woman who stands up and gives you a big hug instead. I learned later that this was her second marriage. And that her first marriage had been highly destructive too. And she was wonderful. I will never forget that 3-minute incident in my life because it said it all. That's who you're looking for, the woman who stands up and walks around and hugs you. Do not try to convince critical people that you're doing the right thing.
Yeah. I have a similar story. And to preface that, I love the way that you said, certain people need to go on the back burner. And sometimes for some people, you may need to start over because sometimes, like you said, there are no safe people in your life. And sometimes there are people who understand your situation so well, but are in such self-denial that they will not rally to your cause or to your side because to do so would invalidate their own experience. That happened to me with my closest friend. And I felt like it was such a gift. I went to talk to her. It was this awful conversation. I felt so hurt and invalidated when I left that space. And the next morning, I felt like God said to me, Jessica, her father is abusive to her mother. Her husband is abusive to her. If she lets herself agree with you, her entire thought pattern up until now will be shattered and she's not ready to hear it. So I just left the relationship open. And like you said, it's over here on a shelf. And if she ever has some awakening, I will be right there by her side. But for now, I was able to compassionately step back and say, I know that place too. Because I know that place too, where I have my own story of trying to convince someone not to get divorced when I didn't know their side of the story or why they were doing it.
Right. We've all been there. I grew up being a completely anti-divorce person. Of course I was. Clearly anyone who would divorce, even if they had biblical grounds for divorce, must be spiritually immature or psychologically damaged. Why would anyone divorce? And wow, did I have to change my mind slowly but surely over the years. Now, I want to move on to the next topic because I have so many people in my group who say, I'll just tell the judge how abusive the other parent is, and the judge will see it my way, and I'm going to get 80% custody or full custody. And they don't realize that the judge by default automatically starts with 50-50 custody, and they don't want to move from that unless you have arrest records or medical evidence of violence. They're not going to move from that. Each parent contributed 50-50 to that DNA in most cases, and judges aren't going to listen to you. That's just the bottom line. You have to have amazing proof. So now you're going to teach us how to get around that, because we have to start with that 50-50 custody mindset, but then we want to gradually move up from there, especially with a very destructive other parent. We would like to get eventually to what amounts to full custody, even if it never looks that way on court documents. Go ahead and tell us how to do that and why.
It depends on your state. I do think that in general, in North America, 50-50 tends to be where everyone starts. But I always tell people, consult with attorneys, at least 5. Ask them the same questions, give them the same information, and that will give you a fairly decent baseline of what you are to expect in your state.
And these are free consultations. These are,
yeah. Okay. I mean, I would definitely suggest, I think there's enough free consultations out there that you shouldn't have to pay for one until you're really down to picking who you're going to use. But yeah, ask the same questions of a bunch of people. The more, the better, because you will get the occasional attorney out there who really thinks that they can do it all, and they're going to tell you what you want to hear instead of the truth. And let me just, as an aside, say that you do not want them as your attorney.
Right. Yeah. Just because they sound all gung-ho and in your corner doesn't mean that they're well liked by the judge, that they're well respected in your court. And boy, that is huge.
If they have the capability, even if they are well liked or well respected, they may not have the capability to sway the judge's opinion.
Right.
And so the court always says, well, we're going to move in the best interest of the child. But like you said, that's not actually the case. They are moving in parents' rights, and they are assuming that parents' rights equals the best interest of the child. And we know that that's not necessarily the case. Right. You can't count on the court to protect your children. Right. And so you have to, first find out what the baseline is in your state. And if it's 50-50, then you need to decide, what is your individual baseline? Like, what can you live with and what can you live without? And these are 2 very important categories, because the next step is going to be negotiate. And this is where we need to be prudent. We need to be shrewd as a serpent, innocent as a dove.
Right.
And we need to go in and do as much as we can without wasting our resources. And my overarching opinion is that custody battles are a waste of resources. Now, like in your case, sometimes you can't escape it because your ex is going to be dragging you back and back and back. And sometimes you have hard evidence, I would say physical abuse against children or sexual abuse against children, a prior indication of pornography with minors or something like that.
Yeah,
but anything
felony level stuff. Yeah.
Because anything that's not in there is going to come down to hearsay.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the shocking thing. It's just shocking how nothing short of felony behavior that other people know about is going to be enough to get full custody. I mean, maybe you'll luck out in some court, in some jurisdiction, and maybe the parent will just completely blow it from the legal standpoint. But a lot of times, unless there's clear physical evidence confirmed by law enforcement that there's been felony behavior, or at least arrest for felony behavior, it's going to be really tough. So how you talk about these 2 categories, what you can live with and what you can't live with. Where do you go? How do you develop that list? Give us some examples.
Yeah. So probably the easiest example to give you is my own. I decided that 50-50 was my baseline. I knew that in my state, that's what was going to be likely awarded. I had no proof. I'd never contacted the authorities. And so therefore, I had nothing to stand on. So that was my baseline. Now, my individual baseline was I needed financial support, whether that was child support or, marital spousal support. But I also knew that he was likely to pay child support and likely to fight spousal support. So therefore, here's what I can live with. Here's what I can live without. I can live with a certain level of support. I can live without it being called spousal support. So I was ready to give that away and lay no claim to it, even though legally there was a very good chance that I could have had a claim to it. Oh, my therapy cat is
I'm moving your background.
Yeah.
Okay. So, let's just put this in dollars and cents. If you were able to get like $1,000 in child support and 500 in spousal or something like that, you fought for the child support, maybe even a little bit, getting that up to maybe 1,200, and you would just let the 500 in spousal go because you knew that the spousal really ticked him off. He was willing to pay child support. He could see what your expenses were, but the spousal just ticked him off.
And in fact, this is where you have to really know your opponent. So, a lot of people use the word narcissist. So if we're talking about somebody who has a very high view of themselves and their image to the outside world is very important to them, if you know that, you can use that to your advantage in negotiation. For example, it's going to make him look good that he's paying child support, even above what the calculator might give me. It's going to make him look good if on paper he has 50-50 or 60-40 or whatever the case may be. He's not going to, and then this was my case, he's not going to read the fine print. So what can I put in there that makes him look good so it feels to him like he's winning? And over here, I really would like more time with my children. And so therefore, I'm going to pretend to fight as much as I can for what for me wasn't as important, which was the financial aspect of it. So I'm going to pretend to hold on to this really tightly at the same time, knowing that this is not actually what I want. What I want is over here.
Okay.
And
so you use it as a bargaining chip.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I really wanted this, but I'll let you win. Just give me this. You didn't even say it verbally. It was just there in writing.
Exactly.
And again, what you just said about being wise as serpents and innocent as doves, as the Bible says, that's what you're doing.
Yep.
You're using negotiation tactics. And I think that's brilliant. Okay. So how did that turn out for you?
Well, it's interesting. There is a story to this. So we actually had signed, notarized documents that stated a 70-30 parenting time and joint legal decision-making. Now, again, the joint legal decision-making is not ideal because it means we both have equal veto power. However, I knew that he wasn't going to take that veto power because history had shown that he's not the kind to really show up and to keep track of appointments and to the kids to all of these different things because it's not convenient for him. And so I also knew that there would likely be more negotiation down the road where I could negotiate things in that legal decision-making. So that was one of the things that I gave. Yes, we have equal legal decision-making, and he wanted a certain amount of parenting time. But again, he didn't pay attention. We had signed documents, like I said, signed and notarized that said 70-30 in my favor. And he came back and said, oh, I didn't realize that this is what I was agreeing to. He laid out the schedule. He laid it out. All I had to do was agree and sign the paper. And he signed the paper. We're in the same room.
So he didn't recount the days. And he didn't count up all the days in 365 days a year. He just had a calendar and you counted the days and realized it works out to 70-30. But that didn't make him look good.
No.
I assume he wanted it to appear to be 50-50.
Well, he actually had suggested 60-40, which was still something that I could live with because my baseline was 50-50.
Okay.
So He wanted 60-40. What he actually suggested was 70-30, and he wasn't paying attention. So when we had those documents signed and notarized, they were ready to go to court. And he came back and said, nope, that's not actually what I agreed to. At that point, he lawyered up. And my attorney, who I will forever thank him for this, said, here's the situation. Yes, these documents are signed and notarized, but they are not legal yet. And if we present them to the judge, and he's over here with his attorney saying, I didn't mean to, that's not what I meant to do, there are three things that can happen. The judge can uphold these documents. The judge can throw them out and decide to go to trial, or the judge could throw them out and you can start over. And he said, there is no go-to position. And I thought, so basically 2/3 of my options are these signed notarized documents mean absolutely nothing. And at that point, I decided that it was either 10 grand plus to go to court, and the emotional turmoil that was going to have on me when I was well into my healing, well into my children's healing. And I knew that the chances were that he was going to cop out of some of his parenting days more often than he would take them. But at that point, I decided it is not worth my mental, emotional, physical, and financial energy to fight this man in court over something that he agreed to. And we settled on a 60-40.
So you called it 60-40, but in reality, did he just do the 70-30?
No, we do mostly have 60-40. What ended up happening, he's not really physically unsafe towards my kids. He does a good job of keeping them alive on his time. Now, I won't call that parenting.
Keeping them alive. As my attorney said, there's no law against being a shitty parent. Excuse my French.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. I mean, he feeds them, he buys them clothes, he takes them on vacations, he gets them to school.
Got it.
But, I know that my kids are going to be clothed, fed, and housed. So I can live with 60-40. But there are times like this past weekend where he says, oh, I want to go on this trip. Can you take them over the weekend? And maybe I'll catch it up another time. And he never does. So practically it works out to a little bit more. But the other thing that happens is that I continue to maintain my eyes on what is actually the best for my children. As long as it doesn't violate who I am, I will compromise. Typically, for example, Christmas, if it's his year for Christmas, I'm invited. If it's my year for Christmas, he's not.
Ah, interesting. Okay.
And so we may have our Christmas at my house, and then maybe they go to his house and I go with. I'm typically invited to birthdays if they're over there. And so I'm able to compromise on certain things when I have benevolent feelings towards him. And he can be reasonable on occasions when he's being a reasonable human, and I have benevolent feelings towards him. I may invite him over for dinner or invite him over to the pool, because at the end of the day, it's in my children's best interest to have that time with me, and it does not violate who I am.
Yeah.
So that's typically how I operate.
I made a lot of compromises too, just to have some peace and to do what's best for my children. Yeah. And it ended up, I did a lot for about 6 years, the first 6 years, and it ended up really going in my favor later on when he tried to accuse me of this and that. And I was able to show the court, I bent over backwards here, the number of hours. This represented hundreds of hours. I saved him thousands of dollars by being a flexible and cooperative parent. Mm-hmm. Nobody can accuse me of this. Each of us have to know where that spot is. And what you're saying mm-hmm. is, where your baseline is, mm-hmm. the point beyond which you will not go. But we have to be a little bit flexible. And again, I want to remind people listening, we are not talking about physical or sexual abuse here.
Right.
Those fall into another category. And I've got another good video on what to do in those situations, because, those are situations where you may have to use completely different tactics. So look at my interview with Mr. Lundy Bancroft on on his book where he wrote a fiction book on a woman who actually had to run and protect her child and disappear into the night. But that is not what we're talking about here. We are talking about another parent who may be mean occasionally, rude occasionally, neglectful occasionally, but they're not physically or sexually abusive. So
Right.
I want to move on to another thing, unless you have something more to say on this particular topic, because just as we are walking a tightrope of knowing what to do and what to say to that other parent, so are our kids. And we need to teach them when and where to speak up and when not to. And I don't know what you're going to say, but for me in my life, I had to tell my children, it is okay if your dad badmouths me or his mother badmouths me, just let it ride.
Yeah.
You do not need to defend me.
Mm-hmm.
I'd rather you be safe and not attacked by them verbally or emotionally. So just go, yeah, mom has some issues. It's okay. I want you to stay safe. And if you have to throw me under the bus just a little bit, go for it. When should kids speak up? And when should they just close their mouths and go with the flow and just try to stay alive?
Yeah, I love that you say that because I would wholeheartedly agree in that situation. Just to finalize the point that we were making about court, there is one more thing that I wanted to say, and that is that even if you have signed court documents, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be upheld without another whole lengthy battle. So even if your co-parent is in contempt of court, are you wanting to spend the time, money, and energy to go back and fight them? Like, is it worth it?
Yeah.
And so I think that this leads right into this case where you're talking about, okay, when do my children need to speak up and when do they need to stay quiet? And I would agree that the staying quiet is what we need to focus on, because typically the speaking up is going to be less, especially in the case of somebody who's not going to take that well. And so I think this is where too, you can start to help your kids to see whether this is using books as examples, TV shows, movies. My kids and I watch a lot of kids movies. I think probably my favorite movies are kids movies because there's so much that you can pull out to teach them from without ever mentioning anything to do with the parent.
Okay, let me just get some clarity here. So you're talking about watching a movie and then stopping the movie and say, do you see how that person responded? That was a good, nurturing, selfless, kind way of responding. What do you think about this other person's behavior? And really analyzing character defects and character virtues. Is that the kind of thing you're talking about?
That absolutely can be. I don't tend to stop the movie in the middle because my kids are younger and they would probably protest and wouldn't want to listen to me anyway. But I tend to allow the movie to settle. And then maybe we're having dessert afterwards, or we're having dinner. Maybe it's a whole nother day or conversation. And they ask me a question about something, or I'll bring something up and say, hey, do you remember when this happened? For example, a really fairly recent example is the Mario Brothers movie. The king, can't remember his name, the big ugly guy, the turtle, writes this song about his true love. Peaches, 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 peaches. Every parent in the audience just knows exactly what I'm talking about. And I'm sorry, now that song is stuck in your head. He has her locked up. He has her friends locked up. And he's basically saying, you marry me or I kill your friends. And so the movie can be really easy for, like, let's say tweens and under to say, oh, he really loves her. He wrote her this great love song. He's confessing his love. He wants to marry her. I said, hey, do you really think that he loves her? Mm-hmm. And my kid's automatic response was, well, yeah. And I said, well, does love look like hurting someone that person cares about deeply in order to gain their affection? Oh, no. Okay, then that's not love. That's control.
Yes. And for another generation, for us baby boomers, You can look at like the musical Hamilton, the King George solo, which is so amazing. You'll be back, just you see, And if you don't come back, I'll kill your friends and family. And that combination of coercion with professions of love, it are so confusing to people, and really good for, another one I really like it on training respect and what respect really looks like is Princess Bride, because everything that Wesley does is respectful to people who are used to being treated with disrespect. So he bends over backwards to be respectful to every single person. And it's another great movie for training on just good behavior and respectfulness and what is not respectfulness. So
right. And that is such a great example of what Jesus does as well, because he went out of his way to give dignity to those who in his day did not have it. Women, children, etc. I mean, I could, the list of movies, if you want movies and my analysis of them, hop over to my website or send me an email, because
at the end, I'm going to have you give us all your information, because I have a feeling a lot of people are going to want to join your group and get in touch with you.
Yeah. So, I mean, movies, that's a great way to do it. The other thing is there will be conversations. Like I said, my kids are younger, and they're very quick. They catch things. And even when they're upset about something, for example, my ex and his family do not badmouth me. My ex doesn't badmouth me. He uses very covert tactics to make it appear as if he is giving me all the credit while subtly undermining my truth.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And so, for example, there was a period of time when my son was quite young where he was saying to me, he was crying and he said, "Mommy, I just don't understand why we can't live together. Poppy says that he wants us to live together, but that you don't." And so these are things that sound true, but are not 100% truth. Right. And so when we can call out the incongruencies that we see in the life around us in general, and the incongruencies that our children may see, you can call that out in a general sense as well. And there are times when you need to be specific, but call out what sounds true but isn't 100% truth. Teach your children the character of God and show them how to hold everything up to his light, right? Like in John 1:5, it says, "Light shines in the darkness and the darkness cannot overcome it." Or it talks about, you will see that you will know the truth and the truth will set you free. 100% truth, the truth of God, is not something that sounds true but is confusing. There is no confusion in God's kingdom. And so in these kind of general ways, you can start to teach them how to understand these subtleties. Yeah. And therefore, when they do that, then you can start to explain to them what is safe to stand up for themselves for and what isn't. For example, I recently had a conversation with my daughter and she was complaining about something. And I said, you can tell your dad that you don't like when he does that, and how you feel. And she said, "Well, I want you to tell him." And I said, "Well, I don't think that's a good idea. I will go with you if you want to tell him, and I will be holding your hand and I will give you support. But there are two reasons why I don't think that's a good idea. Number one, if I tell him, he's going to know that you told me about it and he might be upset with you. And number two, and this is where I got more explicit than I probably have gotten in the history of my separation of divorce. I said, my concern is that if I tell him, he may come back to you with something that sounds true, but isn't full truth. And I always want you to have the truth from me and about me." And so that is planting.
I'm sorry, just to back up for a second. This is if you talk to him with not in front of her. This is if you said to him, like on a phone call where she's not within earshot, she doesn't know what you've really said. you're afraid that he will report back to her what you said, but what isn't really what you said, or the tone you said it in, or the full truth.
Or even if I am in front of her in these conversations, she's
He
not
reinterprets it.
comfortable.
Yeah. Okay.
Exactly. And he
Right.
may come back later with this little twist. Like, he's right. I'm the one who asked for the divorce. I'm the one who didn't want to live with him. But it wasn't because he wanted to and I didn't. It's not that simple. And it's
Right.
not that simple of, well, let's just all live together.
Right.
So there are a lot of different ways. I always tell my children, you speak up when you feel in danger, like when you're scared, when you feel like you're in danger, you speak up if there are other people around. And other than that, you have permission to learn what is safe to say and what is not safe to say. And then you can come home and let it all out. And I swear there are times when I'm like, oh, being the safe parent is so agonizingly hard.
Right. Yeah.
But at the same time, I have to remind myself, they're like this with you because you're safe.
Right. Right. Yes. And so when they come back from visitation and they're melting down and they're highly critical of you, you just take a deep breath, consider where they've just spent the last 48 hours. Okay, guys, let it all out. And I want to go back to something you say about the mind games that covert abusers use. And it's a little bit of this little game playing, mind games. That's the only phrase I can use for it. It's just a mind game that they want to mess with you and not tell the whole truth. And then we kind of have to come around and clean it all up. I also want to say you've got very young kids, but in my case, there was felony issues going on in my destructive marriage. And I could not talk to my children about the biggest elephant in the room regarding the divorce. And so what I did with them is I said, your dad has behaved badly. And even after we've gone to the church and to counseling and all kinds of things, he continued to behave badly. But there's just a great deal about it I can't tell you until you turn 21. It's just not age appropriate. But when you turn 21, I will answer any question you have, no matter how personal and intimate it is, but you need to bring it up. I will not come to you on your 21st birthday and say, hey, what do you want to know? You have to come to me and ask me the questions, and I will keep my banker's boxes full of court documents, and I will explain anything you want to know. And sure enough, I mean, because my kids were 6 and 4 at the time, and I would remind them of this maybe every 2 or 3 years. But sure enough, when they became adults, individually, they each came to me and said, now I don't care what it is. I don't care how explosive it is. Now I'm ready to know the truth about what our dad did. And I said, are you sure? Because you may not be able to sleep for the next couple of nights. Yeah. And they said, yep, we're sure. And so the older one had kind of figured out aspects of it because she had overheard phone calls and things like that. But the younger one was completely caught off guard. He said, oh my goodness, I can't believe it. This now explains so much. Yeah. But I'm really glad that I handled it that way, because when you do this basically 15 years after a divorce, when the kids are in their adulthood, in their majority, then you don't have the emotions surrounding anymore. You've already talked about your divorce for 15 years with your intimate friends, your support group, caring people who really understand. So there's no emotional left for you. It's like it happened to someone else. And your kids can accept it better. And I'm really glad I did it that way. Obviously, I would admit the things that were small and minor, but I'd always say, yeah, there's something really big, but it's going to have to wait. So,
yeah, I do the same thing with my kiddos when they ask about specifics or whatever. I don't think that it's important that you know that right now. I may dance around it, or I may give a metaphor or something like that. And I say, when you're older, if you still want to know, you're welcome to come and ask me. And they may ask me, well, when's older? I don't know yet. But it is so important also that we do protect them in that way. And I'm using that word sort of lightly, because I do not believe in protecting our children from our emotions. I believe that we need to be open and authentic with that, because that is modeling to them that they can have their own big emotions and it is safe to do so, and that should be accepted. However, kids think the world revolves around them, whether they're 2 or 22. Until their brain is fully formed and they've had some life experience, they think they are the sun. And so having conversations with friends or parents or whatever about your ex or about your partner that your children can hear are not going to do them any favors. And it can create an unintentional loyalty conflict. And if you don't have hard and solid reasons to keep your ex away from your kids, if that gets back to him, he could lodge a parental alienation claim against you. And unfortunately, men tend to win those things.
Yeah.
Let them see your emotions. Don't let them hear the details.
Yeah. Good point. Now, you just brought up the topic of emotional regulation. So help us understand how to regulate yourself and teach your children to emotionally regulate.
Yeah. So I have another visual here that I'm going to pop up on the screen. This is what I found. I found that Jesus actually regulated and taught his disciples how to regulate in some ways. So I pulled out some scriptures. The first one is, you're going to model it. You have to be able to regulate yourself before you can teach your children, before you can help your children, before you can co-regulate your children. Otherwise, it doesn't work. And that's why when I work with people, I want them to have done a lot of their work, their healing work, their education work, their deconstruction work, understanding prior to coming to me with, I want to help my kids. Because just like in my case, I wanted to help my kids and I was in no place.
Person know that they're poorly emotionally regulated? Give me some symptoms of poor emotional regulation in yourself as an adult.
Reactive, hard-lined about things. You still believe there is a black and white or a right and wrong. Respect from your children is to be upheld at the utmost. They say something and your reaction is above and beyond what the situation may warrant. Don't speak spoken to. All of those types of mindsets are a lack of emotional regulation. When you cannot be in the room with someone, whether it's your child or someone else, who is throwing a tantrum, and let's be honest, adults have tantrums too. I do. If you can't be in a room with someone who's throwing a tantrum and see it as their problem, if you're taking that on, then you still need to work on it. Now, that said, we're all a work in progress. Like, I am not 100% regulated all the time. So, you're allowed to mess up. But I do want modeling, just like everything in parenting, more is caught than taught. Modeling comes first. And the scripture example that I use is when Jesus said, "Come follow me. I will show you how to be fishers of men." He's not giving some lecture and then having them go and do it. He's saying, come and watch how I do it. Come along with me. And so that's step one. Step two is co-regulate. And there is a lot out there on co-regulation. When Jesus is with his disciples in the boat and he's sleeping and the storm comes up, they're freaking out. They're totally dysregulated. Lord, save us. We're going to drown. How can you be sleeping? Do you not see? And what he does first is he gets up and he speaks to their heart and he's with them. Now, I wouldn't necessarily use his words with your kids, like, "Oh, you of little faith." Probably not the best idea, especially with teenagers. But you can say, like he did, "I'm with you." And then and only then does he turn and calm the situation. He's with them first. And that is the first tenet of co-regulation, is you are using your own regulation to aid your child. And there's so much brain science around this with mirror neurons and all of this sort of thing. Like, we cannot be interacting with another human without affecting them their physiology and their brain response. And so there are tons of ways to do this. The simplest, with littles, you can hold them. You know, if they're small enough to be held, you can hold them. With teenagers, you can, reach out and grab their hand or squeeze their shoulder or a side hug, or you can just sit. And this even works with a door between you. You can just sit and be regulated close enough, and their body will respond.
I would throw in there, take a long drive with them.
Absolutely. My kids don't drive yet, so.
Well, I drive.
And then you're going to coach them. And Jesus models this with the feeding of the 5,000. He, again, the disciples are dysregulated. They're hungry, probably hangry. And they have all these people. And they're like, can you get rid of the people? Because we want to eat. And they're a little bit freaked out. And he says, you feed them. You've seen me do miracles. You've been with me. You know how to do this. But he's not far away, and he still does his part. So when they had gathered all the food that they had, Jesus still blessed the food. And this is like coaching your children. You've modeled it for them. You've co-regulated with them. You have explicitly taught them. You're going to be close by and observant if they get stuck or need help, but you are giving them you got this. And then the final step is just observing. And it is incredible to see your child use their tools and their techniques, or to come home and tell you about when they used them at school. And they're like, oh, I remembered this thing that you told me, mommy. And it was incredible. Or to be sitting there when my kids are getting into a conflict, and I'll see my daughter kind of grab onto her legs or the edge of the chair or whatever and go, and it's just that simple. And then she gentles her voice, and I can tell she's really ticked off, but she is working on it. This is never done. Like, you may get to the observation stage with one child, and you may be in the modeling stage with another child, or you may get to the observation stage for one circumstance, and then something else presents itself and you start all over again. So this is never complete, but it's a fairly good working model.
This is really great, because just that emphasize that you see them, you understand their feelings, you hear them, you validate their feelings, and you say, I am right here with you. I'm going to walk through this with you. Now, maybe I'm really close to you when you're young or when this is a new experience. And maybe sometimes I'm coaching you. Okay, I'm here on the sidelines if you need me, but I think you can do this. We could probably talk all day. I want to give you an opportunity to give us some parting shots, some parting thoughts. Please tell us about how people can get in touch with you, your group, what you offer, and I'll put them all in the show notes.
Yeah, sure. So you can find me at mosaicmotherhood.com. I do have a free resource that includes that last 4-step model that I just showed, and includes some information on triggers and a couple of really cool examples on how to teach your kids to regulate. And you can find that at mosaicmotherhood.com/4, the number written out in letters, FOUR-keys. And yeah, that's mostly where you'll find me, at Mosaic Mothers on Facebook and Instagram. And then I do have a free group similar to yours that is Full Hands, Fierce Hearts. And that's for warrior mamas who are walking through a destructive relationship and wants to empower her kiddos. So
that's wonderful. That's great. Yeah. And do you do private one-on-one coaching?
I do one-on-one for moms. I also work with children over the age of 10.
Okay.
I have something that I've been trying out recently and has gotten a lot of positive feedback, called tandem coaching. And what that is I will work with mom and child. They each have their individual sessions. There is the firewall, so to speak, of confidentiality between them, but we work together for the good of the child. If mom needs help regulating, if mom needs help understanding, we decide first and foremost in the first meeting, it's the 3 of us or however many of us are going to participate. We decide what what is outside the bounds of confidentiality, and everyone agrees, and everything else, I get explicit permission, or I just don't tell the details. But it does give me the ability to say, hey, it kind of sounds like maybe you might try this. Or I think your mom really wants to know how to connect with you. How do you think you might do that? Or what would be helpful for you? So I offer that as well.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time, Jessica. This has been lovely. More power to you. Keep going.
Thank you so much, Gretchen, for the opportunity. And I'm also so grateful for what you do.
If you benefited from this recording, you will find support and clarity in my book, The Life-Saving Divorce, available in paperback or Kindle or audiobook on Amazon. You can also follow me, Gretchen Baskerville, online at lifesavingdivorce.com or on Facebook, Blue Sky, YouTube, Instagram, and Twitter. You can sign up for my email list at lifesavingdivorce.com. Women and men of faith may request to join my private online Facebook group, Life Saving Divorce Private Group. For more on life-saving divorces, please subscribe and click the link to the next recording.